The end began not with a bang, but with a whisper of falling glass. We called it the First Fall, a name that felt too gentle for the silent apocalypse it heralded. It wasn't an invasion in the way our fictions had prepared us. There were no motherships blotting out the sun, no guttural declarations of war broadcast across our trembling networks. Instead, there was only a shower of shimmering, microscopic motes that descended through the atmosphere for 3 days straight. A slow, glittering rain that caught the light and made the world look like the inside of a snow globe. People stood outside with their faces upturned, laughing as the crystalline dust settled on their tongues. Scientists called it a unique atmospheric phenomenon, a byproduct of a distant supernova seeding our stratosphere with exotic minerals. They called it beautiful. They were wrong. I knew they were wrong from the moment my spectroscope analyzed the first sample. The intricate, lattice-like structure, the impossible geometry of its bonds, it wasn't mineral. It was biological. It was a seed. My paper on the subject, titled Xenomorphic Panspermia, a Hostile Genesis, was dismissed as academic hysteria, the desperate cry of a disgraced xenobotanist trying to claw his way back to relevance. Dr. Eris Thorne, the man who saw aliens in every cosmic ray. They laughed then, but no one is laughing now. The laughter died about a year after the first fall, when the world began to chime. It was a faint, resonant hum that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once, a sound that vibrated in your teeth and settled deep in your bones. That's when the glimmer, as we'd come to call it, truly began to grow. It started on plants, a delicate crystalline filigree that crept over leaves and bark, turning entire forests into sculptures of quartz and ice. Then it moved to the soil, sinking its roots deep and transforming swaths of fertile earth into glittering, sterile landscapes. Animals changed next. Deer grew jagged antlers of pure, translucent crystal, their eyes glowing with a soft internal light. We called them glass stags, beautiful and lethal, their new appendages sharp enough to tear through steel. Birds grew feathers of spun silica, leaving shimmering contrails in the sky as they flew, their songs replaced by the discordant chiming that now filled the air. The glimmer wasn't killing our world, it was rewriting it, overwriting our familiar biology with its own alien, crystalline code. And now, it was in our water. That's what brought Lena to the door of my lab, the reinforced steel bulkhead of a converted underground seed vault that served as my sanctuary and prison. The heavy clang of her fist on the metal was as subtle as everything else about hers. I slid the viewport open, and her face filled the small, armored glass circle. Her eyes, the color of a stormy sea, were narrowed, her jaw set. Rainwater and sweat traced paths through the grime on her face. "Thorn," she grunted, her voice a low rasp. "Our last purifier just went critical, clogged with glimmer sludge. We're down to 2 days of clean water." I opened the door, and she pushed past me, her patched-up tactical gear dripping onto the concrete floor. She scanned the lab with a look of profound skepticism, her gaze lingering on the holographic displays of rotating crystalline structures and the bubbling beakers filled with glowing, viscous fluids. To Lena, my work was a foolish indulgence, a distraction from the only thing that mattered: survival. She was the leader of the Enclave's scavengers, a pragmatist forged in the crucible of this new, broken world. She didn't care what the glimmer was. She only cared about what it did and how to avoid it. "I warned the council this would happen," I said, menacingly, turning back to a microscope. "The glimmer is adapting. Its molecular structure is evolving to mimic and infiltrate our filtration technology." Lena scoffed, picking up a shard of crystal from a tray with a calloused thumb and forefinger. "Spare me the lecture, Doc. We need a new catalytic converter. There's a municipal water treatment plant about 10 clicks east of here. Old city limits. Intel says it was sealed tight before the fall. Its parts should be clean." I didn't look up from the eyepiece. The city is suicide. The glimmer concentration is exponentially higher in urban centers. The metallic infrastructure acts as a catalyst, a trellis for it to grow on, which is why you're coming with me, she stated, not asked. I finally turned, my surprise evident. Me, I'm a botanist. Lena, not a soldier. I'd be a liability. You're the one who knows this stuff, she shot back, tossing the shard back onto the tray with a clatter. You know its patterns, what it reacts to. My crew knows how to handle the ferals and the terrain, but we don't know jack about the sparkly stuff except that it's bad. You'll keep us from walking into a crystal garden that decides to bloom while we're inside it. You're not a liability. You're a walking, talking glimmer detector. Her logic was crude but sound. My fear of the outside was eclipsed only by my thirst and the gnawing desire to see the glimmer's advanced growth patterns up close. It was a fool's bargain, but we were living in a fool's world. The journey began at dawn. The air was thick with the sweet, cloying scent of what I'd termed silica pollen, shimmering motes that hung in the air and promised a slow, crystalline death if inhaled without a rebreather. Lena led the way with two of her crew, a grim-faced man named Jax and a young, wiry woman called Cora. They moved with a predatory grace, their rifles held low, their eyes constantly scanning the alien landscape. I felt clumsy and loud in their wake, my scientific gear clanking with every step. The world outside our small, fortified enclave was terrifyingly beautiful. Trees that had once been familiar oaks and maples now stood as colossal crystal formations, their branches creaking not in the wind, but with the low, resonant chime of the glimmer itself. The ground crunched under our boots, a mixture of gravel and shattered crystal fragments. We saw a herd of glass stags in the distance, their crystalline antlers catching the morning light in a blinding display. They watched us pass, their glowing eyes passive but intelligent, their very presence a violation of everything natural. I took samples whenever I could, scraping dust from rocks, snipping a razor-sharp leaf from a crystalline shrub, my mind abuzz with the sheer biological audacity of it all. "Keep up, Thorn," Lena barked, not looking back. "This isn't a field trip." We reached the outskirts of the city as the sun reached its zenith. The glimmer's presence here was overwhelming. It scaled the sides of skyscrapers in massive, geometric curtains, pulsing with a soft, internal luminescence. The streets were choked with crystalline growths that resembled coral reefs, sharp and intricate, turning the urban canyon into a deadly maze. The chime was louder here, a constant, vibrating pressure against the skull. I felt a strange sense of reverence mixed with my terror. This wasn't just growth. It was architecture. It was a city being built on top of our own. The water treatment plant was a low, concrete fortress on the edge of what used to be a river, now a slow-moving slurry of gray water and glittering glimmer sediment. The building was, as Lena's intel suggested, sealed tight, its heavy steel doors miraculously unbreached. Jax used a plasma torch to cut through the main lock, the hiss of the tool echoing in the oppressive silence. The air that rushed out from within was stale but clean, free of the silica pollen. Inside, the plant was a tomb. A layer of dust covered everything, but the machinery seemed intact, a relic from a world that no longer existed. We found the supply room easily, rows upon rows of shelves stocked with the parts we needed. Cora and Jax began loading the catalytic converters into their packs, but I was distracted. A low, rhythmic hum was emanating from the main filtration chamber, a sound distinct from the Glimmer's chime. It was a machine. "What is that?" I asked. My voice hushed. Lena put a hand on her rifle. "Power's been out for years. Nothing should be running." Curiosity, the scientist's eternal virtue and vice, took hold. I walked toward the sound, my boots echoing in the cavernous space. I pushed open the heavy door to the primary tank room and stopped dead. My blood ran cold. The vast circular chamber was not empty. It was filled with glimmer, but not like anything I had ever seen before. It wasn't the chaotic, organic growth of the outside world. Here, the crystals had formed a structure of breathtaking complexity. Crystalline conduits ran from the walls in precise 90-degree angles, weaving together to form a network that covered the floor and climbed the sides of the massive tanks. It looked like a motherboard the size of a football field, pulsing with a coordinated, rhythmic blue light that synced perfectly with the hum I had heard. This wasn't random. It wasn't an infestation. It was a machine, a processor, and in the very center of the chamber, suspended by thick crystalline cables, was a central spire, a colossal crystal that glowed brighter than the rest. It was a nexus, a hub. My mind, which had been cataloging, analyzing, and theorizing for years, finally made the terrifying leap. The Glimmer wasn't just a life form. It was a distributed intelligence, a planetary-scale computer terraforming its environment into a network. The entire planet was being turned into a brain, and this was one of its primary processing nodes. "Lena," I breathed into my comm, my voice trembling. "You need to see this. It's thinking." As the words left my lips, the hum in the room changed pitch, rising to an aggressive, inquisitive whine. The rhythmic pulsing of the network accelerated, the blue light shifting to a deep, angry crimson. The central spire began to vibrate violently, and cracks appeared along its surface. Lena's voice screamed in my ear, "Eris, get out of there now!" But I was frozen, mesmerized by the horror and the beauty of it. The Glimmer knew we were here. We had trespassed into its mind. The spire shattered, not into dust, but into a swarm of razor-sharp crystalline shards that swirled together like a vortex of glass. The swarm coalesced, taking shape, forming limbs and a torso, its body a chaotic mass of shifting, grinding crystal. 2 points of intense red light ignited within its emergent head, fixing on me. It was a harvester, a security program, a digital antibody given physical form. It let out a sound that was not a roar, but a screech of pure, weaponized data, a shriek of static and chiming that vibrated the very air into a weapon. It raised an arm that was a blade of solid crystal and took its first, grinding step toward me. I had wanted to understand the Glimmer. Now, I was about to become a part of its system. Time snapped back into focus with the roar of Lena's rifle. The sound was brutally loud in the enclosed space, a percussive blast of old-world violence against a new-world monster. The bullet, a tungsten core round designed to punch through engine blocks, struck the harvester square in the chest and might as well have been a spitball. It sparked brilliantly, a flash of kinetic energy dissipating harmlessly across the crystalline planes of its torso, and ricocheted with a high-pitched whine that ended with a solid thump into a concrete wall behind it. The harvester didn't even flinch. It simply tilted its head, a gesture of cold, analytical curiosity. Then the shriek came again, not from a mouth, but from its entire body. It was a wave of pure sonic force, a physical pressure that made the fillings in my teeth ache and the fluid in my eyes vibrate. The air itself seemed to shred. Jax and Cora staggered back, clutching their helmets, their own rifle reports swallowed by the overwhelming noise. Lena held her ground, firing again and again, each shot a useless firefly against a diamond mountain. "Fall back, Thorn! Get behind me!" she bellowed, her voice strained against the auditory assault. I scrambled backward, my feet slipping on the slick, dusty floor, my mind a maelstrom of terror and frantic calculation. This wasn't a beast. A beast could be killed. This was a physical manifestation of a system, an immune response. You can't just shoot a fever. The harvester took another step, its crystalline feet grinding on the concrete with the sound of tectonic plates shifting. It ignored the gunfire, its glowing red eyes fixed solely on me. I was the anomaly, the foreign code that had breached its server room. Lena, Jax, and Cora were just firewalls, obstacles to be removed. It raised its blade arm, a 5-foot shard of perfectly clear crystal honed to a monomolecular edge, and swung it in a lazy horizontal arc. It wasn't aiming for anyone. It was testing the space. The blade sliced through a thick steel support pillar as if it were cheesecloth, the severed top half groaning as it sagged. "Move," Lena yelled, shoving me toward the doorway I'd come through. "Get back to the others." She laid down a pattern of covering fire, aiming for the joints where its limbs met its torso. But the crystal there was just as dense. The monster was a single, contiguous thought form. It had no weak points. As Jax and Cora dragged me back into the corridor, I saw the harvester turn its attention to them. It was surprisingly fast for its size, closing the distance with a gliding, unnatural motion. Jax pivoted, planting his feet to fire a burst at its legs. It was a fatal mistake. The harvester's other arm, which I'd thought was just a bulky club, lashed out. It wasn't a blade, but a fist of raw, jagged crystal. It caught Jax on his side, the impact echoing like a wrecking ball hitting a container car. He was thrown a dozen feet through the air, his body ragdolling before slamming into the side of a massive filtration tank with a sickening crunch of metal and bone. He slumped to the ground, motionless. "Jax!" Cora screamed, a raw, human sound that cut through the inhuman chiming. Lena didn't hesitate. She grabbed a flashbang from her belt, pulled the pin and threw it. The detonation was a concussive flash of white light and sound that momentarily staggered the harvester. The red glow in its eyes flickered. It was disoriented. "Cora, grab him, Eris." "With me," Lena commanded, her voice like iron. While Cora scrambled to their fallen comrade, Lena grabbed my arm, her grip bruising, and dragged me toward the maintenance catwalk that ran along the side of the chamber. "What the hell is that thing?" "Thorn," she demanded, her breath hot inside her helmet. "It's a defense mechanism," I panted, my legs burning as we climbed the metal stairs. "A security program. Its body is a projection, a tool. Brute force is useless." "Then what isn't useless?" she snarled, pulling us into a crouch behind a large junction box. Below, the harvester was already recovering, its head swiveling to locate us. "Tell me something I can use." My mind raced, sifting through years of data, through theories on crystalline structures and resonant frequencies. Resonance, I said, the idea solidifying even as I spoke it. Every crystalline structure has a resonant frequency. If you can match it with a powerful enough sonic wave, you can induce catastrophic structural failure. You can shatter it like a wine glass. Lena stared at me, her stormy eyes wide. You want to sing it to death. Not sing. We need to generate a specific high-frequency pitch, extremely high, and we need to amplify it. There must be a control room, an audio system, emergency broadcast. The main control booth, she said instantly, pointing across the chamber. Glass walls overlooks the whole floor. A death trap down below. Cora had reached Jax. He was alive, but his leg was twisted at an unnatural angle, and blood was darkening the fabric of his trousers. She was trying to drag him to cover, but his dead weight was too much. The harvester was turning toward them. We have to draw it away from them, Lena said, her voice grim. She looked from the harvester to the control booth, then back at me. A decision was made. Get to that booth. Do your thing. I'll buy you time. Before I could protest, she was gone, vaulting over the railing and landing on a series of large pipes a level below. She fired a shot that pinged off the harvester's head, a deliberate, taunting move. The creature's red eyes snapped to her. Hey, you ugly piece of glass, she shouted, her voice echoing in the vast room. Come and get me. The harvester accepted her invitation, turning its bulk away from Cora and Jax and starting toward the pipes where Lena was perched. It was my chance. I scrambled, staying low, my heart hammering against my ribs. The catwalk shuddered as the harvester brushed against one of its supports below. I made it to the control booth door, which was locked. I slammed my shoulder against it, but the reinforced steel wouldn't budge. Lena, it's locked, I yelled into my comm. Her reply was a strained grunt, followed by the roar of her rifle. No time for keys. I looked at the console next to the door. An emergency release. I smashed the plastic cover with the butt of my sample collection hammer and slammed my palm on the button. The door hissed open, and I tumbled inside. The booth was a relic, filled with old CRT monitors and dusty control panels. But behind the obsolete tech was what I needed: a plant-wide audio override system, complete with frequency modulators and amplification controls. It was ancient, but the principles were the same. I just had to find the right frequency. I powered up the system, the monitors flickering to life with a low hum. Below, Lena was leading the harvester on a deadly chase through the labyrinthine machinery. She was impossibly agile, using the environment to her advantage, sliding down conduits and weaving through the legs of the giant tanks. But the harvester was relentless, smashing through any obstacle in its path, its crystal blade cleaving metal and concrete with terrifying ease. The entire structure of the plant was becoming unstable around them. I began cycling through frequencies, starting in the upper ultrasonic range. The speakers around the chamber crackled to life, emitting a high-pitched whine that was barely audible to me, but was clearly irritating the harvester. It paused, its head twitching, the chiming of its body becoming discordant. It's working, I shouted, a wild surge of hope in my chest. Keep it there. I began to fine-tune the frequency, watching the monster's reaction. The crystal on its shoulders began to vibrate, a low hum emanating from its core. I was close, but the glimmer was fighting back. The lights in the control booth flickered. The glimmer network that honeycombed the room, the beautiful, terrifying motherboard, began to glow with that same crimson light. The power to my console sputtered. It was trying to cut me off, to protect its soldier. "No, you don't," I muttered, ripping open a panel and bypassing the main power, rerouting the audio system directly to the emergency backup generators. The console flared back to life. I found it. A specific frequency 37.4 kilohertz that made the harvester's entire body resonate like a struck tuning fork. Microfractures, fine as spiderwebs, began to appear all over its surface. It let out its sonic shriek, but this time it was different, weaker, filled with pain and confusion. It swiped wildly at Lena, who dodged back just in time, the tip of its blade slicing the air where her head had been. "Now, Aris hit it with everything," she screamed. I slammed the amplification slider all the way to maximum. The feedback was instantaneous. A deafening, pure tone erupted from the speakers, a sound so clean and so powerful it felt like it could tear the world apart. The harvester froze. The microfractures on its body spread with impossible speed, racing across its limbs and torso like lightning. For a single, silent moment, it stood as a statue of shattered glass, held together by some unseen force. Then, with a sound like 1,000 chandeliers falling onto a marble floor, it imploded. It didn't explode outward. It simply collapsed into a glittering cascade of inert, non-sentient crystal shards that rained down onto the floor. The chiming stopped. The crimson light in the network faded back to a placid blue. Silence descended, hooked only by the drip of water and the distant groan of stressed metal. We had won. Lena stood breathing heavily, her rifle lowered. Across the room, Cora had managed to pull Jax behind a solid concrete barrier. The immediate threat was gone. "Let's get the converters and get out of here," Lena said, her voice heavy with exhaustion and grief for her injured man. I stumbled out of the booth, my legs unsteady, my ears ringing. As we gathered the supplies and fashioned a crude stretcher for Jax, I walked back to the edge of the chamber. I looked down at the pile of crystal shards. The network was quiet, but it wasn't dead. As I watched, I saw a single shard twitch, then another. Tiny filaments of blue light, no thicker than a hair, were extending from the main network on the floor, reaching out to the shattered remains of its soldier. It was collecting the data, analyzing its failure, learning from its mistakes. It was already preparing for the next time. My blood ran cold. "Lena," I said, my voice barely a whisper, "we need to leave. Now." The journey back was a nightmare. We moved as fast as we could with Jax, whose pained grunts were a constant, grim reminder of our losses. But it wasn't the terrain or our burden that made the journey so terrifying. It was the world itself. It had changed. The glimmer was no longer passive. The crystalline trees seemed to bend toward us as we passed. The silica pollen in the air grew thicker, swirling in our direction as if guided by an unseen hand. When we saw a herd of glass stags, they didn't just watch us. They moved, their herd forming a silent, glittering line that paralleled our path, their glowing eyes tracking us with a terrifying, unified intelligence. The planet was watching. The glimmer knew who we were. It knew what we had done. It was hunting us. We finally saw the lights of our enclave, a pinprick of warmth in the cold, crystalline dark. We half-carried, half-dragged Jax through the gate, which slid shut behind us with a reassuring boom. We were safe, for now. We had the converters. We would have water. But as Lena and I stood on the rampart later, looking out at the silent, shimmering forest, the victory felt hollow, temporary. "We survived," she said, her voice flat. "This time." I shook my head, the horrifying truth settling in my soul like a shard of ice. "No," I said, my voice trembling with the weight of my discovery. "We didn't just survive. We trespassed. We broke into the mind of a god, and we killed one of its thoughts. This wasn't the end of a battle." I turned to face her, my eyes meeting hers in the pale moonlight. "This was the beginning of the war. The war began with the water. We installed the new catalytic converters, and for 3 blissful days, the Enclave's taps ran with clean, pure water. It was a small victory, but it felt monumental. Morale soared. People laughed. For the first time in a long time, the future felt less like a countdown and more like a horizon. On the 4th day, the screaming started. It began in the hydroponics bay, a high-pitched wail of agony that was cut short. We found the botanist, a kind, elderly man named Alistair, face down in a trough of nutrient solution. When we turned him over, we saw that his eyes, nose, and mouth were choked with a fine, sparkling crystal dust. The water hadn't been clean. It was a Trojan horse. The glimmer had evolved again, creating a variant so microscopic, so insidious, that it had slipped through our brand new filtration system undetected. It was a bioweapon, designed to crystallize organic tissue from the inside out. Panic ripped through the Enclave like a shockwave. The water we had celebrated was now a source of terror. We sealed the reservoir, but it was too late. Dozens were already infected, their coughs producing shimmering clouds of silica pollen, their skin taking on a faint, pearlescent sheen. Our small medical bay was overwhelmed. The Enclave, our fortified sanctuary, had become a quarantine zone, a petri dish for a plague of living crystal. I locked myself in my lab and am working in a feverish, sleep-deprived haze. I was responsible. My knowledge of the glimmer had led us to the treatment plant. My actions there had provoked this retaliation, as well as a physical weight, pressing down on my chest where I channeled it into fury, into a relentless drive to find a solution. I analyzed the contaminated water under an electron microscope, and what I saw chilled me to the bone. The glimmer particles weren't just floating in the water, they were communicating. They formed intricate, shifting patterns, creating a microscopic, liquid network. They were smart dust, programmable matter. This wasn't just a contamination, it was a targeted, intelligent infiltration. Lena found me on the 2nd day of the outbreak, my face inches from a monitor displaying the glimmer's terrifying ballet. She didn't knock. The bulkhead door hissed open, and she stood there, her face a mask of controlled rage. Jax was dead. The glimmer dust in the water had found fertile ground in his shattered leg, crystallizing the tissue around the wound with horrifying speed. Cora had been with him at the end. "How do we stop it, Thorn?" Lena's voice was quiet, but it held the lethality of a coiled viper. There was no room for excuses or apologies in her world, only results. "They're networked," I said, my voice hoarse. "The particles in the water, the ones in the air, the ones inside the infected, they're all connected to the larger glimmer consciousness. They operate on a specific set of frequencies, a carrier wave that transmits instructions." I pointed a trembling finger at a waveform analysis on the screen. "It's like a radio signal. If we can jam that signal, we might be able to disrupt their instructions. Stop the crystallization process." "Jam it with what?" she demanded. "The sonic emitter we used on the harvester is a cannon. We need a scalpel. something that can target the infected without killing them. My eyes drifted to a project I had mothballed years ago, long before the fall. It was a foolish, optimistic piece of technology from a more hopeful time. "There might be a way," I said slowly, pulling a dusty schematic onto the main screen. "It's a bioresonance device. I originally designed it to simulate plant growth using targeted sonic frequencies to encourage cell division. It operates on a micro level." Lena stared at the complex diagram. "You're saying you can use this thing to awk the glimmer to death inside someone's body?" "Not talk," I corrected. "Disrupt. I can modify it to broadcast a counter frequency, a jamming signal. It should, in theory, isolate the glimmer particles from the main network, rendering them inert. It won't remove the crystal that's already formed, but it could stop the spread." "Theory," she spat the word like it was poison. "Jax is dead because of a theory. Cora's in medbay, coughing up glitter. I need a weapon, not a hypothesis." "It's the only weapon we have," I countered, my voice rising with a desperate certainty. "But the prototype is low-powered. It has a range of a few feet at most. To generate a jamming field powerful enough to cover the entire enclave, I'll need a much larger, more stable power source, and a focusing crystal to amplify and direct the wave." I knew what I was asking before the words even left my mouth. "We have to go back out there." Lena's silence was heavy, oppressive. The idea of leaving the relative safety of the enclave, of venturing back into the Glimmer's intelligent, hostile territory, was insane. But looking at the schematic, at the faint glimmer of hope it represented, she saw there was no other choice. "There's a geological survey outpost in the mountains, about a day's hike from here," she said finally, her voice resigned. "They had a prototype geothermal generator. Should be power enough. And they were drilling for quartz. We might find a focusing crystal there." And so, we went. This time it was just the two of us. The enclave was on lockdown. Every able-bodied person needed to maintain the quarantine. We left under the cover of a moonless night, slipping out a secondary airlock like thieves. The world outside was even more hostile than before. The Glimmer's awareness was palpable. The air was thick with a shimmering haze that forced our rebreathers to work overtime. The crystalline flora seemed to track our movement, their sharp leaves rustling in a wind that wasn't there. We moved quickly and quietly, sticking to the shadows, our footsteps muffled by the crystalline grit that now covered everything. The silence was unnerving. The passive chiming of the Glimmer had been replaced by a low, expectant hum. It knew we were out. It was waiting. We found the first trap an hour into our journey. It was a field of what looked like delicate, knee-high crystal flowers. They were beautiful, their petals pulsing with a soft, inviting light. My Glimmer detectors, a handheld device I'd calibrated to sense high concentrations of networked particles, began to scream. "Stop," I hissed, grabbing Lena's arm. I tossed a small stone into the middle of the field. The moment it landed, the flowers snapped shut with the speed of bear traps, their crystalline petals interlocking to form a cage of razor-sharp spikes. A moment later, the ground beneath them began to glow as the Glimmer network rerouted energy, preparing to incinerate whatever it had caught. We had nearly walked into a self-sterilizing minefield. It was a chilling revelation. The Glimmer wasn't just growing, it was designing, creating active defense systems. It was learning the art of war. Lena navigated us around the field with grim determination, her instincts as a scavenger now augmented by my technological warnings. We were a strange, effective team, her primal awareness of the landscape and my analytical understanding of the enemy. The geological outpost was perched on a high, windswept ridge, a collection of prefabricated domes now caked in crystalline growth. The geothermal generator was housed in the central dome, its telltale plume of steam miraculously still rising into the cold mountain air. But guarding the entrance was a new kind of horror. It looked like a wolf, but its body was a sleek, semi-translucent construct of smoky quartz. Its movements were fluid and predatory, and its eyes glowed with the same malevolent red light as the harvester. It was a hunter, a glimmer hound, and it was patrolling the perimeter of the dome. "It's another one," Lena whispered, pulling us behind a large, crystalline boulder. "Smaller than the last one, but faster." "It's a sentry," I added, studying it through my binoculars. "Its purpose is to guard this location. That generator must be important to the network." "Great. How do we kill this one? Sing it another song." There was no time to build another sonic cannon. This had to be close quarters. "Its composition is different," I observed, zooming in. "It's not a single contiguous crystal like the harvester. It's an aggregate. Thousands of smaller crystals held together in a cohesive form. The bonds between them are its weakness." I pointed to its chest, where the red light was brightest. "That's its core, the nexus point holding it together. If you can disrupt that, I need to get close," she finished, her eyes already scanning the terrain, planning her attack. "I'll draw it away. You get to the generator, find a crystal, power up the disruptor, and get ready. I'm not fighting this thing for long." "Lena, it's too risky. We're out of options." "Eris," Yinshi snapped. "People are dying. Now go." She broke from cover, sprinting toward a cluster of smaller domes to the left. She fired a single, deliberate shot that struck the ground near the Glimmerhound. The creature's head snapped in her direction, and it let out a low, chiming growl. It bounded after her, its crystalline claws kicking up showers of grit as it ran. It was terrifyingly fast. I used the diversion to race toward the main dome. The door was sealed with a thick layer of crystal, when the Glimmerhound's patrol had worn a path around it, leaving the metal frame exposed in places. I used my sample hammer, shattering the crystalline seal with a series of frantic blows until the door groaned open. Inside, the generator hummed with a steady, powerful rhythm, a beacon of old-world energy in this alien landscape. Racks of geological samples lined the walls, and among them, I saw it a perfect fist-sized quartz crystal, clear as water. I worked with frantic speed, my hands shaking. I hooked my portable disruptor device to the generator's main output, the machine groaning under the sudden power draw. I carefully placed the quartz crystal into the focusing array, calibrating the energy flow. I could hear the sounds of the fight outside the sharp crack of Lena's rifle, the snarling chimes of the Glimmerhound, the crash of something heavy hitting metal. My detector screamed a warning. A wave of energy was building outside, the Glimmer network pouring power into its hunter. Just as I locked the final conduit into place, the disruptor whirring to life with a rising hum, the far wall of the dome exploded inward. Lena was thrown through the breach, landing in a crumpled heap. The Glimmerhound stood silhouetted in the ragged hole, its red eyes blazing. Its smoky quartz body was cracked and fractured from Lena's assault, but it was still functional. It lowered its head, its chest glowing with contained energy, preparing for a final, devastating attack. "Lena!" I screamed. She pushed herself up, one arm hanging limp at her side, her face a mask of pain and defiance. She raised her pistol with her good hand, ready to sell her life dearly. But she wouldn't have to. I aimed the disruptor. It was heavy, unwieldy, and I had no idea if it would even work on a creature this dense, but it was our only chance. "Get down!" I roared. I pulled the trigger. A beam of invisible, inaudible energy shot from the focusing crystal, a silent wave of pure disruptive frequency. For a moment, nothing happened. The Glimmerhound continued to power its attack. Then, a single fracture appeared on the glowing core in its chest. The fracture spread, branching out like a bolt of black lightning. The creature paused, a look of what I could only describe as surprise in its glowing red eyes. The chiming growl died in its throat, with a soft, final sigh. Like the settling of dust, its body dissolved. The thousands of crystals that formed its body lost their cohesion, their network connections severed, and collapsed into a sparkling black pile on the floor. Lena stared, her one good eye wide with disbelief. "Did you just turn it off?" "I cut it off from the network," I said, the disruptor heavy in my hands. "It's just a pile of rocks now." We had done it. We had the power source, and we had a weapon that worked. But as I looked at Lena, bruised and bleeding, at the wreckage of the dome around us, and felt the silent, hateful pressure of the planetary consciousness outside, I knew our victory was perilously fragile. We had won another battle, but the Glimmer was a learning system. It had shown us its soldiers and its hunters. What would it create next? And how many more of us would have to die before we found a way to stop it for good? The war for Earth had just escalated. We were no longer just fighting an infestation, we were fighting an intelligence that was actively designing new ways to kill us. And we were hideously, terrifyingly outmatched. The hike back to the Enclave was a descent into a new layer of hell. The Glimmer's response to our attack on its sentry was not immediate or violent. It was far more insidious. The very air grew thick and oppressive, shimmering with a density of silica pollen that coated our gear in a fine, glittering film within minutes. My detector, which had previously chirped with warnings, now emitted a steady, high-pitched scream that I had to muffle against my chest. The network was no longer just watching, it was actively hunting, saturating the environment with its presence, trying to find us, to choke us. The flora had become overtly hostile. Crystalline vines, thin and sharp as concertina wire, snaked across our path, forcing us to backtrack or laboriously cut our way through. The ground itself became treacherous, with patches of what looked like solid crystal suddenly dissolving into a slush of razor-sharp shards under our weight. It was like the planet itself was trying to wound us, to get its crystalline code into our blood. Lena was a silent, stoic engine of pain. I had set and splinted her dislocated shoulder as best I could, but every jarring step sent waves of agony across her face. Yet, she never faltered, her one good arm keeping her rifle steady, her eyes ceaselessly scanning the shimmering, alien landscape. Her resilience was terrifying, a force of nature in its own right. We saw no more Glimmerhounds, but we were not alone. Strange, new crystalline fauna flitted at the edges of our vision, things that resembled insects with wings of spun glass, and multi-legged scavengers that scurried between the crystal formations, their bodies reflecting our lights in 1,000 disorienting directions. The Glimmer was diversifying its ecosystem, populating the world with its own creations at an exponential rate. When we finally stumbled through the Enclave's airlock, we were met not with relief, but with a scene of quiet, desperate horror. The quarantine had failed. The medbay had overflowed into the main common area, which was now filled with cots. The air was thick with the low, pained moans of the infected and the sharp, antiseptic smell of recycled air, desperately trying to scrub the silica pollen from circulation. Cora met us at the door, her young face aged by a decade of stress and exhaustion. "It's spreading faster," she said, her voice a dead whisper. "We're losing about 1 an hour. The crystal forms in the lungs first. They just suffocate." My heart hammered against my ribs. "Get the generator hooked up to the main grid," I ordered, my voice more commanding than I'd intended. "I need all the power you can give me. We're going to broadcast the jamming signal across the entire enclave." The next few hours were a blur of frantic activity. While Lena was taken to the medbay, I worked with the enclave's few remaining engineers, my portable disruptor now looking like a toy next to the massive geothermal generator. We cannibalized the main communications tower, turning the entire structure into a massive broadcast antenna for the counter frequency. The risk was enormous. If I had miscalculated, if the frequency was even slightly off, we could end up accelerating the crystallization process, killing everyone instantly. The weight of hundreds of lives rested on my math. Finally, it was ready. I stood before a makeshift console, my hand hovering over the activation switch. The entire enclave held its breath. The low hum of the generator was the only sound, a stark contrast to the ragged coughing coming from the common area. I looked through the control room's armored glass at the rows of sick and dying, at Cora holding the hand of a young boy whose skin already had the faint, tragic shimmer of the glimmer. I met her eyes. She gave me a single, sharp nod. I threw the switch. The communications tower outside groaned as a massive surge of power hit it. A low, sub-harmonic hum vibrated through the concrete floor, a feeling more than a sound. It was the jamming signal, the counter frequency, flooding every corner of the enclave. For a long, agonizing moment, nothing happened. The coughing continued. My blood turned to ice. I had failed. Then, a single patient, a man in the cot nearest the glass, let out a ragged gasp. He coughed, but this time, no shimmering dust came out. A woman a few rows back, who had been writhing in pain, went still, her breathing evening out, one by one, across the entire room. The progression of the disease halted. The violent, networked attack of the glimmer particles was cut off, their connection to the hive mind severed. They were rendered inert, just like the glimmer hound's remains. A collective sigh of relief, so profound it was almost a sob, swept through the enclave. The dying had stopped. The victory, however, was a fragile stalemate. The disruptor field had to be maintained constantly. If the power failed for even a minute, the glimmer would reactivate. We were prisoners in our own sanctuary, tethered to a machine, living inside a bubble of safety in the heart of a hostile world. Worse, the crystal that had already formed in the patients' bodies remained. We had saved them from death, but they were left scarred, their lungs and other tissues permanently damaged by the crystalline structures. They would live, but their lives would be a constant struggle. Lena recovered quickly, her body seemingly rejecting weakness as a matter of principle. As soon as she could move her arm, she joined me on the ramparts. We stood looking out at the glimmer-infested world, the broadcast tower behind us humming with the frequency that was keeping us alive. "You did it, Eris," she said, her voice lacking its usual edge of sarcasm. It was a simple statement of fact. "We stopped the bleeding," I corrected, my gaze fixed on the horizon. "But we haven't cured the disease. We're living on borrowed time. The glimmer is outside, learning, adapting. It knows about the counter frequency now. It will develop a resistance, or a way to bypass it. It's a planetary intelligence. Lena, it has time. We don't. She was silent for a long moment, watching a flock of silica-winged birds fly a patrol pattern in the distance. So, what's the endgame? She asked. We can't live in this bubble forever. My mind had been churning over that very question, running through 1,000 desperate, impossible scenarios. The answer I'd arrived at was both logical and utterly insane. We have to kill the brain, I said. Not the little nodes like the one in the water plant. We have to find the central processing core, the Glimmer Prime. If it has a distributed network, it must have a nexus, a point of origin where the consciousness is most concentrated. We find it, and we destroy it. Lena turned to stare at me, her stormy eyes searching my face for any sign of madness. You want to find the heart of a sentient planet and stab it. I want to inject a virus, I corrected. A logical one. The disruptor frequency, modified and amplified 1,000 times over, delivered directly to the core. It wouldn't just jam the signal, it would create a feedback loop, a catastrophic cascade failure that would theoretically wipe the entire network. It would shut the whole thing down. Theoretically, she repeated, the word hanging in the air between us. And how, exactly, do we find this Glimmer Prime? That was the impossible question. The planet was vast. The core could be anywhere deep underground, at the bottom of the ocean, hidden in a place we could never reach. But my analysis of the Glimmer network had revealed a clue, a subtle anomaly in the data flow. The network isn't random, I explained, pulling up a holographic map of the continent on my datapad. The energy flows follow specific pathways, like ley lines. They all converge on a single point. The map zoomed in, a red dot blinking in a remote, inhospitable mountain range hundreds of kilometers to the north, the highest peak of the old Sierra Spine. According to the geological surveys, it's the most seismically and electromagnetically active point on the continent. If I were a crystalline alien intelligence looking for a place to set up my primary server, that's where I do it. Lena's gaze was fixed on the blinking red dot. That's a suicide mission. It's the only mission left, I said quietly. We stay here. We die. The Glimmer will eventually find a way past our defenses. We go there. We have a chance. A vanishingly small one, but a chance. The plan was simple in its audacity, complex in its execution. We would need to build a larger vehicle-mounted version of the disruptor, a logic bomb, as I'd morbidly named it. We would need to scavenge the parts from the fallen cities, journey across a continent controlled by a hostile intelligence, fight our way up a mountain to the heart of the enemy, and deploy a theoretical weapon that might not even work. It was a fool's quest. But as we presented the plan to the Enclave's council, to the survivors whose lives hung in the balance, I saw a flicker of something in their eyes that I hadn't seen since the fall. It wasn't just hope, which was a fragile and often foolish thing. It was resolve. Humanity was a species that had crawled out of the mud and reached for the stars. A species that had survived ice ages and plagues and its own self-destructive tendencies. We were cornered, battered, and on the verge of extinction. But we were not broken, and the Council approved the mission. The Enclave, once a simple shelter, transformed into a factory, a research lab, and an armory. Everyone had a purpose. The engineers began work on the vehicle and the logic bomb. The scavengers, now led by a recovered but scarred Cora, planned expeditions for the necessary components. The rest fortified our defenses, knowing that our mission was the only thing standing between them and a slow, crystalline death. Lena and I stood before the mission board, The map of our impossible journey spread before us. "You know," she said, tracing the route with a finger, "for a botanist, you've gotten awfully good at planning military operations." I looked at the schematics for the logic bomb, at the equations that held the fate of our world. "When the garden you're studying is trying to kill you," I replied, "you learn to get good at weeding." The road to the Sierra Spine would be long and lethal. We were launching an attack on a god in its own church, and the god knew we were coming. The Exodus, as the engineers had grimly dubbed our vehicle, was a monument to desperation and ingenuity. Its chassis was the armored belly of a pre-fall personnel carrier. Its wheels were salvaged from a massive mining hauler, and its hull was a patchwork quilt of scavenged armor plating, bolted to its back. Looking like a monstrous alien spine was the logic bomb. The device hummed with a contained power that made the fillings in my teeth ache. Its oversized quartz focusing crystal glowing with a soft internal light. It was a weapon of mass disruption, a scalpel designed to perform planetary-scale neurosurgery. There were only 4 of us on the crew. Lena, of course, was in command, her presence a magnetic pole of grim determination. Cora, her youthful face now etched with the hardness of a veteran, served as our navigator and scout. A burly, silent engineer named Gregor, whose family had been among the first to fall to the waterborne plague, was our driver and mechanic. He treated the Exodus and its volatile cargo with a quiet, paternal reverence. And then there was me, the reluctant prophet of this crystalline apocalypse, the keeper of the weapon that was either our salvation or our tombstone. We left the enclave under a bruised, violet dawn. The entire population stood at the gates to see us off, their faces a mixture of hope and fear, as the massive gate ground shut behind us, sealing us out in the shimmering, hostile world. A profound sense of isolation settled over me. We were a single rogue antibody in the bloodstream of a sick and dying planet. The first week was a grueling crawl through the ruins of civilization. The cities were the Glimmer's strongholds, transformed into alien ecosystems of breathtaking and lethal beauty. Crystalline structures, intricate as frost on a window pane and sharp as surgical steel, choked the streets. We navigated through canyons of glass, the Exodus's heavy treads grinding the glittering debris into fine, sparkling dust. The Glimmer's fauna was everywhere. We were stalked by packs of the smoky quartz glimmer hounds, their red eyes burning in the shadows. Gregor, with a lid foot and nerves of steel, plowed through them when he had to, the impacts shuddering through the vehicle's frame like depth charges. From the sky, flocks of silica wing predators, which Cora had named shrikes, would dive at us, their bodies exploding against our armor in showers of razor-sharp fragments. We learned to time our movements, traveling during the lulls in the Glimmer Network's energy cycles, which I monitored with a frantic intensity. The planet was breathing, a slow, rhythmic pulse of energy, and we were a microbe trying to navigate its respiratory system without being noticed. It was in the blasted plains between the cities that the Glimmer unveiled its new masterpiece. It rose from the earth ahead of us, a pillar of dust and shimmering light that coalesced into a form that defied all our previous encounters. It was a colossus. It stood at least 50 feet tall, a bipedal monstrosity of jagged, obsidian-like crystal, its form vaguely humanoid but twisted, asymmetrical, as if designed by a committee of nightmares. It had no head, only a single, massive, glowing red lens in its chest that swiveled to fix on us, pulsing with a deep, resonant hum that we could feel in our bones. This wasn't a soldier or a hunter. This was a siege engine. Gregor, evasive maneuvers. Lena's voice was tight, calm, but laced with an undercurrent of pure shock. The Exodus lurched to the left as the Colossus raised a massive arm. A beam of focused, incandescent energy, a coherent blast of pure glimmer network power, shot from its palm. It struck the ground where we had been a second before, instantly vitrifying the earth, turning 100-square-foot patch of dirt into a smooth, black mirror of obsidian. It's a mainline defense, I stammered, my hands flying over my console. The network is diverting massive amounts of power to it. It's a guardian, a firewall protecting the path to the core. Can we kill it? Cora asked, her knuckles white as she gripped the dashboard. The logic bomb is calibrated for the prime network, I said, the desperate calculations already running through my head. A focus blast might work, but it would drain a third of our power. We'd only get one shot, and if we miss, then we don't miss, Lena said, her eyes locked on the approaching giant. Gregor, get us closer. Cora, find a weak point. Ares, get that weapon ready to fire on my mark. What followed was a suicidal ballet of machine versus monster. Gregor drove like a madman, weaving the lumbering Exodus through a field of crystalline monoliths that the Colossus had seemingly grown for cover. The energy beams were relentless, scorching the earth around us, the heat from near misses washing over our hull in palpable waves. Cora, her face pressed against the armored viewport, called out targets. The joints at the knee and elbow. They're not solid. They're articulated with smaller crystals. I diverted power to the logic bomb's primary capacitor, the hum inside the cabin rising to a painful shriek. The focusing crystal glowed with an almost blinding intensity. "Ready to fire!" I yelled, my voice strained. "Get me a clean shot at its chest." The Colossus, frustrated by our agility, stopped and planted its feet. The lens in its chest began to glow with a terrifying brightness. It was charging a massive, wide-angle blast, intending to annihilate not just us, but the entire area. "Now or never," Lena breathed. "Gregor, straight at it." Gregor roared and slammed the accelerator. The Exodus shot out from behind a monolith, racing directly toward the giant. It was a charge of the Light Brigade, a desperate, final gamble. "Fire!" Lena screamed. I slammed my palm on the firing stud. The world outside went white, a beam of pure, disruptive frequency. A silent, invisible spear of logic shot from our vehicle and struck the Colossus square in its glowing chest. For a moment, it was as if our weapon had been absorbed. The giant stood, its attack still charging. My heart stopped. I had failed. Then, a web of black fractures, identical to the ones that had destroyed the Glimmerhound, erupted from the point of impact. They spread across its obsidian body with lightning speed. The Colossus let out a silent, agonizing roar of corrupted data. Its limbs locked, its body contorted, and then, with a final, shuddering groan, it crumbled into a mountain of inert, black dust and shattered crystal. The silence that followed was more profound than any sound. We had done it. We had faced the Glimmer's Leviathan and won, but the victory had cost us. The logic bomb's power cells were critically low, and the Exodus's armor was scorched and battered. We limped toward the mountains, a wounded animal dragging itself to a final confrontation. The Sierra Spine was a fortress of jagged peaks and razor-sharp crystalline ridges, a landscape designed to repel any intruder. As we began our ascent, the Glimmer's final defense became terrifyingly clear. It wasn't a monster. It was the mountain itself. The rock beneath us began to shift and reform. the Glimmer Network manipulating the very geology of the peak. Avalanches of crystalline shards rained down on us. Fissures opened in our path, threatening to swallow us whole. Gregor drove with a primal focus, his big hands wrestling with the wheel, navigating a road that was actively trying to kill us. Finally, we reached a plateau just below the main peak. The exodus could go no further. The rest of the journey had to be on foot. The air here was thin, crackling with a raw, static energy. The hum of the network was a constant, physical presence, a pressure that made thought difficult. We could see it now. The peak was not rock, but a single colossal crystal, a jagged spire of pure, translucent matter that pulsed with a soft blue light. It was Glimmer Prime. We unslung the logic bomb, now reconfigured into a portable, two-person carry. It was crushingly heavy. Gregor and Lena took the front, their muscles straining. Cora and I took the back. The final ascent was a brutal, vertical climb up a path of shifting crystal. As we neared the summit, the network's psychic pressure intensified. I saw flashes behind my eyes, alien geometries, impossible colors, thoughts that were not my own. The glimmer was trying to break into my mind. "Don't let it in," Lena grunted, her face slick with sweat. "Focus on the mission. Focus on the anger." We crested the final ridge and stood on the summit of the world, in the very heart of our enemy. The peak was a flat, circular platform of humming crystal. We were standing on the surface of the brain. "Here," I said, my voice trembling. "We deploy it right here." As Gregor and I began the arming sequence, the platform beneath us began to glow. From the center, a figure rose, coalescing from the crystalline light. It was not a monster. It was a perfect, androgynous form of pure, shimmering light, its features serene and beautiful. It was the Glimmer's consciousness, its core program manifesting a form it thought we would understand. "You are in error," a voice echoed, not in our ears, but directly in our minds. The voice was calm, ancient, and utterly without emotion, a persistent, illogical anomaly. "Your code is chaotic. It must be purged." "We're not code," Lena snarled, raising her rifle, a useless gesture against a being of pure thought. "We're alive. Life is a calculation," the being replied, its form shimmering. "Your existence is a rounding error in a perfect equation. This world will be harmonized." The logic bomb was armed. The 30-second countdown began, its numbers stark and red on the display. The light being raised a hand. A wave of pure force slammed into us, throwing us back from the device. My head hit the crystal floor, and the world swam. Gregor was down, unmoving. Cora was trying to get to her rifle. Lena, however, was already on her feet, blood trickling from her temple, her eyes blazing with a defiant fire that outshone the alien god before her. She charged, not at the being, but at the logic bomb. 10 seconds. "Your resistance is irrational," the voice chimed in my skull. 7 seconds. Lena reached the bomb with a final, desperate roar. She grabbed the device with both hands and shoved it. It slid across the slick, crystalline surface, coming to rest at the very feet of the light being. An error to the last. The being stated, its hand still raised. 3 seconds. Lena turned to me, and for the first time, I saw her smile. It was a fierce, savage, beautiful thing. 1 second. The world dissolved into silent, white light. When I came to, there was only silence. The oppressive hum of the network was gone. The air was just air. The crystalline peak we stood on no longer pulsed with light. It was just a mountain of inert, beautiful crystal. The logic bomb had worked. The cascade failure had wiped the Glimmer's consciousness, severing every connection, turning the entire planetary network into nothing more than pretty, harmless rock. Gregor and Cora were stirring, groaning. But Lena, she was gone. Utterly gone. The blast focused at point-blank range on the nexus of the Glimmer itself had disintegrated her, along with the alien god. She had made the final, illogical, human choice, sacrificing herself to ensure the virus found its mark. We made our way back down the mountain, back into a world that was finally, blessedly quiet. The Glimmer was gone. The forests were now silent, beautiful sculptures of crystal. The fauna were frozen, inert statues. Humanity had won. We had survived. Weeks later, as our enclave began the long, arduous process of reclaiming our silent, glittering world, I stood on the rampart, looking at the sunrise. The cost had been immense, the scars on our world and our souls deep, but we were still here. The Glimmer had called us an error, a chaotic anomaly in a perfect system, and I realized, with a clarity that was both humbling and fierce, that it was right. We are messy, irrational, emotional, and chaotic. We are a rounding error, and we are the deadliest species in the galaxy. Because when backed into a corner, when faced with extinction at the hands of a perfect, logical God, our chaos is our greatest weapon. It's the error in the equation that allows us to win, and we will always win.